Hello and welcome to Down and Dirty with Darci. I'm your host, Darci Smith, also known as Career Coach Darci. We are here to get down and dirty about careers, uncovering salaries, wild stories, backgrounds, and more from guests with some of the most eccentric professions each week. This podcast is presented by Onomy. Welcome back to Down and Dirty with Darci. It's Darci, Career Coach Darci here. I can't wait to introduce our guests, so I'm going to get right into it. We have Julie and Yue with me. They host a podcast called Dateable, and they've had this podcast for over 8 years, and they dive into how they started it, all of the amazing things that I feel like learning about podcasts, I kind of jumped into it so quickly, and it was really cool to hear from them because they started it back when there weren't as many as there are today. So really interesting to get down and dirty about their podcasting careers. They also have corporate careers as well. And just a little fun fact for you, this is our last episode of Down and Dirty with Darci, which I will cover a little bit more of that after the interview. So stick around and listen to the end of the interview where I will come back and chat with you. But let's get into it. Welcome back to Down and Dirty with Darci. I am here with Julie and Yue. I am so excited to speak with them. They have a podcast called Dateable, and I'm going to let them take over their bios. So whoever wants to jump in and go first, please go for it.
Sure. Yeah. I'm like, where do I start?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself is my go-to question, as if I'm interviewing you.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Julie Kravchik, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-hosts of Dateable. And, I didn't think I'd ever be a podcast host. This was not something that I set out to be, partially because this didn't exist when I was in college and when I was, thinking about career trajectory. But what's funny, actually, in retrospect, so I got my career started in design. So I've always been like in a creative type field. And, I actually started more in like advertising and eventually moved into like web and app design, which I still do today on top of the podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I remember having this conversation with one of my former managers. And at this point, I was very far from creative worlds. I went from being in a creative position when I first got hired at my first job. And then somehow they were like, oh, we heard you're good at creative. And it went from actually making creative to reviewing creative, which is kind of like the bottom of the barrel of it. But I was young at the time, and I'm like, I'm just going to go with it and see if I like it. And, my career took me in some interesting areas. I was doing like pricing and yield management at for a tech company for Yahoo.
Yeah,
probably you don't even know what that means. I was
Right.
deep in Excel, and I was just like, wait, I was a creative. What happened? And that actually, prompted me to go back to school for design. So actually, sometimes when you can get off course, it could actually be a good thing. But where I was going with this is I remember a former manager when I was thinking about like, okay, should I take this new role? Should I take this promotion? Him saying, what do you actually want? And even from that early stage, I was like, I want to have like a website that I eventually monetize and I own the content. Never did I think it would be dating. Never did I think it would be a podcast space, but I knew like I always wanted my voice to be heard in content. So it's really interesting, like looking back of like how, even these jobs and roles that felt so far away at the time have actually helped me get to where I am today.
Yeah. Wow. And so you went to school, like how long were you in between before you actually pivoted and went back? Because that's so many people that listen are like, I don't know if I'm ready to make that jump and make that decision, even though I feel a little bit off track. Yeah. So, yeah.
I feel like I've had, 3 careers in my, like I graduated college in 2005. So it's been a while. So it's no spring chicken here, but it's been a while. But initially I was in advertising, and then I wanted to be in more like real design. So I went back to school probably, I'm trying to think now, it's been so long, but at least it was about 8 years in because I eventually left. Yeah. I was working at Yahoo, which was up there with Google and pre-Facebook, but at the time now it's a dinosaur. It doesn't exist, but it was like the hot tech company.
No,
still
it's so
exists.
cool. Yeah.
It was the
I don't know
hot
if it's
tech
cool,
company.
but
It was the hot tech company at the time. But I got to that point that I'm just like, wait, I've really veered from where I wanted to be. Like this job, when I first got it, was awesome because I was making ads, I was doing creative, and then somehow I went to pricing and yield management, which no one knows what it is. And yeah, 8 years in, I went back to school. I did a night program in interactive and visual design. So I stayed at work. So I didn't have to leave work. But then I realized like how much this was my passion and calling. And I was like, I need to just leave. And I just took the jump and left. And I had this time that, I actually wasn't working for a little, but I was really fine tuning skills. And then I actually did a startup. So I've had like multiple career paths along the way.
Wow.
But the fun fact of the startup, so I kind of, at an early stage, knew I wanted to connect people. And it actually started off as a dating idea, which again kind of comes full circle to where we are today. But the idea was that I was frustrated by dating apps. And I'm like, where were the days, like back in the day, where you just met people organically, like in college and high school and, through friends of friends. So I created this app that was called 500 Brunches, where it connected people in small groups over brunch so you can meet in person. So it was kind of like a more curated meetup. And
I
that's
love
actually
that.
where I met Yue. So that
Yes.
kind of
Oh,
brings
that's
us full
perfect. I was
circle.
gonna ask. Yeah. 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 You, give us tell me about yourself. And I can't wait to hear how you guys connected and started the podcast. But yeah, give
yes,
us a little
during
background,
500
please.
brunches, we're like,
Yeah.
let's talk about dating.
Yeah. With some mics in front of us.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know what we're doing, but it's been such a ride. I graduated in 2003, so I'm even more of a dinosaur. And I think, when I first graduated college, I always wanted to be in entertainment, but I had no connections, no family members have ever gone through that route. And so I just went the corporate route. I was a consultant and I was like traveling every week, but still this pull towards entertainment was still calling me. So I quit my job when I was 25 years old. So I had the quarter life crisis. I was living in New York City and I said, I want to be a TV host. At the time, there was no such thing as like cell phone cameras or any digital media. I took an actual video camcorder. I don't even know, is that what they're called? A
Yeah, I think
camcorder?
so. Like the one that yeah.
And I recorded my coworkers at the time before I quit. I recorded a fake red carpet Emmys event with them as guests on this red carpet. That was my first reel that I had snail mailed to agents in New York City. And I was very lucky because at the time there were very few Asian faces on TV. And this one agent, which is like one of the biggest agencies in New York, reached out and said, we are interested in working with you. And so I was very much about luck and timing. So I was a TV host for over 10 years, but during that time, entertainment is not a very sustainable career when you're just freelancing. So you go from show to show, gig to gig. So in between, I was filling in the time with more consulting work. It's funny. It's like when I was in corporate, it's like I want to be entertainment, but I was in entertainment. I was like, I need the money of corporate.
Right.
So still had both,
Yeah.
right? And so I realize now, fast forward to however many years later, you do need a balance of all of it. You can't just double down on creative, and you can't just double down on the mundane, like business side of things. You need a balance for it to feel fulfilling, honestly, and to make a living out of it. So, after that, the full freelance gig in New York, I moved to Beijing on a whim for personal reasons. It was supposed to be a 2-week trip, ended up staying for 2 years. And at the time in those 2 years, I hosted a TV show in China in Mandarin. And it was probably one of the most life-changing experiences of my life in terms of my career and personal life, because I felt like it gave me a jolt. It was like, you know what? You went down this one path. There's so many other paths to explore if you're willing to open yourself up to that. So did this entire thing in China. It was very challenging. Mandarin is not a strong suit for me anymore, even though I was born in China. It was really hard to host a TV show completely in this language.
Right.
But really felt proud of myself for doing that, and then did a mental reset after that show, moved to San Francisco, wanted to see what San Francisco was all about. You know, the tech scene was really booming. I heard all about Yahoo, and I was like, tell me all about Yahoo.
The top of the tech scene right there.
Yeah.
Show
I like
me.
that. I like that callback. That was great.
Show me your ways, Yahoo. And when I met Julie at one of her events, I just remember being so in awe of all the people in San Francisco and how entrepreneurial they were and how they were able to think outside the box. Because for me, I come from such a traditional background where everybody in my family followed one career path. And you come to San Francisco and everyone's got something else going on. They may have their day job and they're working on this thing, they're building a thing, they have a product. And
Trying to
you're
afford to
just
live here.
trying to make a living. And I just think it shows how the current workforce is so different than it was even 10 years ago. People can have multiple revenue streams, income streams, and also fulfill the different parts of their brain. So Julie and I met in San Francisco at one of her events, and we started talking about dating, of course, as one would. You know, I was new to San Francisco, never dated in San Francisco. Julie had only dated in San Francisco during her adult life, so we had a lot to compare, and just had so much fun talking about kind of like all the stories we had. So we decided to start the podcast, but of course, we never thought about it as a full-time job. No. It was purely for fun. I had like these lavalier mics from productions I've done. We just put them on us and we're like, let's just record. And our first episode, we found one of our friends and he told a story and we had people in my apartment. It was just so like, we didn't know what we were doing, but let's just see where this goes. It was very fun. But of course, we both had our separate careers. And in San Francisco, I ended up going into tech, fitness tech. But content creation was always at the backbone of what I did. So I knew that no matter what I do in my career, there's always going to be a piece of content in there. And I will also admit that what makes my career, my day job more fulfilling is because I have Dateable as well.
Same.
Yeah,
I would be completely bonkers right now if that was my only job. No, it's like so nice to have the balance of Dateable.
I think,
does it still feel like it's fun and it doesn't feel like it's, of course there's a lot of work that goes into it, obviously, but does it still get to feel like the hobby, that same kind of passion versus, especially when you have the comparing it to your corporate side, because both of you guys still have corporate jobs, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like both of us one day would love to do this full time, but there is a little side of me that is a little fearful of that because then this is like your revenue source. So we do have our corporate jobs and that security blanket that this still can feel fun. That being said, like, will this always be sustainable? I think right now the two of us, you know, like we don't have children, for instance. Like if we had kids and we're doing a corporate job and this, it just wouldn't work. So there's gonna be a time where we're gonna have to make certain decisions. And like, we're also writing a book right this minute. So now we have a third job on top of the second job.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But like, it's just like, it's like kind of a double-edged sword. It's like one opportunity opens, but then, you have limited time to keep doing it. But I mean, I think what's really interesting too is like, for me, I started as more behind the scenes with this podcast because I came from, I'll do the tech side, I'll do the branding and the website, because that was what my background was. And also it was, I think, a limiting belief at the time, but like I thought because like I didn't have any sort of credential, like who was I to get on a microphone and start talking? We're like Yue, and then we had a host at the time when we first started. They were both former dating coaches. So over
Oh, okay.
time, I actually, we just like, there was reasons why just the other host ended up moving on. Just he moved out of San Francisco. We were San Francisco based at the time, and just other reasons too. And we actually really looked for a second co-host. Let me say that again. We really looked for a second co-host hard, and we just could not find someone that there was good chemistry with at all. And I just started talking because you and I were friends, and we're like, wait, this is working better than any of these other people that are randomly coming on. So there were like a lot of those kind of, paths that were open because the opportunity presented themselves. So I think sometimes we think we need to have certain credentials in our resume in order, but oftentimes it's just taking the risk and trying something.
Yeah, I agree. And plus the genuine connection between you guys when you talk,
Yes.
it comes across. When I have a question, when you meet people, like strangers are out and about and they go, oh, what do you do for work? What do you guys say?
Oh my God. I just go everything. And that's it. It's so hard to explain, right? And yesterday I had this conversation with a neighbor who, you meet neighbors and you never discuss what you do. So yesterday she was finally like, what do you do?
What the heck do you do?
And I said, I have a day job. It's in fitness and tech, but my passion is my podcast called Dateable, and we've been doing this for almost 8 years. And she's like, oh, tell me more about the podcast. Everyone's always more interested in the podcast, right? So that's been my elevator pitch for myself. I don't know what you
I like
what
it.
do you say?
What's yours, Julie?
It depends on who I talk to. I think that's more of it.
Yeah,
But
I'm
I
with
think,
you on that.
Yeah, it's also interesting, though, Yue brought up the point of when you say 8 years, because a lot of people have podcasts now. So sometimes you're almost like not looked at seriously. If you're just like, oh, I have a podcast, like they think there's like 2 people listening. But when you say like 8 years, it holds different weight. So that's also something interesting we found along the way. But yeah, I mean, I generally just say I'm a creative professional because that kind of encompasses
that.
everything that we're doing, design, writing, podcasting. It's all under a creative umbrella.
But then you could get looped into that like influencer, like, I'm a creative, and you're like, wait, influencer, OnlyFans, what are you on?
Yeah. All of the above.
I know, my dad
OnlyFans.
jokes, he's like, oh, you're an influencer, and I'm like, no, I'm not. But then we'll get our ad campaigns, and it'll be like, dear influencer, and I'm like, I guess we are a little micro influencers.
Yeah, and I will say that too, because when I tell people about your guys' podcast, because for people that don't know, I met Julie totally separate from the podcasting world. She's like a friend of my brother's wife. So it's just been, and she was like, oh yeah, I have a podcast. And the same thing, she kind of downplayed it until she was like, oh yeah, I mean, it's been around for 8 years. And I'm like, okay, this is like, I don't know how else you say it, because it is a podcast. You're not going to say, just by the way, guys, it's super successful, right? Like, you're not going to say that. But, it's the same thing. And even for me, like, my podcast is super, super young. And I'm very open with, like, it's very hard to get listeners. And still, I'm telling people, like, I fly to LA once a month. I'm there to film it. Like, it's very, all production, a lot of content creation. And still, you're like, why am I trying to prove, that it's because everyone has podcasts. So yeah, I think it's an interesting world.
Same thing in LA when someone goes, I'm an actor. You're like,
right.
But
what have you been in?
Yeah, but there's such a thin line between a non-working actor and someone and a celebrity. At what point do you cross over to celebrity? Because someone could be working on a show, you just don't know who they are. It's kind of the same thing with podcasting. It's like there's such a thin line between making it feel like it's more than it is.
I'd love to hear how you guys describe if someone's like listening now that hasn't heard of Dateable. Can you guys give us like what they would get from the show if they went and listened? Like, what's it all about?
Dating.
Who wants to take it?
A lot of dating.
Yeah.
We started out as a dating stories podcast, and now we go deep. We dive into the psychology, sociology, and anthropology behind dating. We really hone into the why. Why do people do the things that they do? And then how do we move past the things that are happening? We truly feel like right now the modern dating scene is not the best. I mean, as anybody who's dating right now will say, it's not the best, I hate the apps and I hate this. And we realize it's not about the technology. It's not about the dating app culture. It's not about the dating culture at all. It's about the way we are interacting with dating. So we're trying really, one of our mission statements really is to try to help people understand that they're accountable for their own actions, but they're also, they are empowered to create the love lives that they want. So that's kind of our focus per episode.
Yeah. You know, it started off, I would say, because the two of us were lost ourselves and we wanted answers. You know, that's like, it's a little selfish, but at the same time, that's what brings content that's relatable, right? Is you have a need yourself. And I think, you know, like when we talk to people, they're always like, dating is the worst. Like, how are you not super jaded by listening? But we've actually felt more energized by talking to people. And honestly, it's changed the way we look at dating, relationships, and love. And it's given us the tools to have, you know, the relationships we've always wanted that, quite frankly, if I didn't do this podcast, I would not have been able to, you know, make it as far down the line in a relationship at all. So for us, like, I think we've gone from the why is this happening to how do we take all the knowledge that we've learned to help people get out of this perpetual state of this is the worst to being like, actually, this is freaking awesome and it's going to set me up for the relationship I've always wanted.
Right. And what I love is you guys can open up a space for people that may feel like they're the oddball out in their dating relationship. You guys have talked about if you're older and you feel like it's over after 40, like, can I still date? Then I heard you guys talk about that. And like the open relationships versus non-monogamous versus whatever the case is. Like, I feel like you've had guests on that really go deep into that. And I was listening because, you know, got to prepare. I was listening to your guys' podcast and you said something that really hit home with me, Yue, was when you said, I've realized because of talking and all this and my past relationships, but I'm going to honor like what that person went through in their past, but I'm not going to take it on. And I was like, man, that is like I just feel like, for one, obviously go listen to their podcast, but that's like the nugget I took out of that particular episode. And it's so true because we do that fixing thing or we do whatever the case is. But to say, hey, I understand that's what you went through and maybe you made mistakes or maybe these things happened to you, but I'm not going to take that on. Like, we have to have our own relationship and, you know, move forward. But yeah, I thought that was pretty good.
I mean, you know, at the beginning when we first started, Yue said this too, is like it was about dating stories, funny dating stories. That's what we thought this podcast was going to be. We quickly realized that like that actually wasn't that interesting. Like, of course, like from time to time, there's always a good dating story, but most of it comes down to the relationship with ourselves. And at the core of this podcast, even though it is about dating and relationships and love, it is really about the relationship with yourself and how do you start to put yourself at the forefront, because in dating so often we let other people call the shots, or you know, we stay in relationships because we want to help fix that person instead of being like, what do I actually want? So a lot of it has been reframing and looking at it more from that lens.
Do you feel like having the podcast has affected your guys' relationships, whether it be dating or like actual relationships, because you do share so much about your life? Do you feel like you have to check in with your partner and say, hey, is this something I can share on my podcast?
Yes.
Like, can you tell us about that? Because I deal with that myself.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious, you know, and you guys are you're getting way more personal. Like mine's, you know, a bit more corporate related. Yours is your actual dating lives. So yeah, how does that go with like current or past partners?
Yeah, I mean, when I was dating, I was terrified to tell people. So I didn't tell people about it because I didn't want them to think that, you know, I was on these dates trying to get material or anything like that.
Right.
But then it got weird because it's clearly like a very important part of my life. And I remember like going on a couple dates with someone and not telling them. And then they were like, oh, so do you work on any side projects? And I'm like, yeah, I've been working on this thing for like 8 years. Do I just not bring it up? So I was like, oh yeah, I do. Like, I'll tell you about it. But then it was just weird because he's like, why didn't you tell me about this, you know, before?
Right.
So when I met my current partner, who is Darci's sister-in-law's friend.
Yeah.
Darci knows.
Right.
I was just like, at that point, I'm just like, I'm going to be who I am and the right person will be into it or not. And he was super excited about it. Like, he thought it was really freaking cool. I think there was like maybe this like 1 second, like, oh, what is this? But overall was really supportive along the way, and, you know, has been still super supportive. That being said, there has been a few lines. Like, I think there's been like a conversation we had at the very start of our relationship of like, how much do I bring things up? And we kind of netted out like, you know, like, I can obviously say I'm in a relationship. I can say what we're doing. Do I need to like air every last issue we're having or challenge? No, because that's not what the podcast was about in the first place.
Right.
And, you know, of course, people are interested in our personal lives, but at the core of it, people really are listening to the podcast to help their own personal lives. So it's not really like an update of like our life here and there. But that being said,
can
like,
relate.
and like the other day, I'll just be transparent. Like, Yue and I did a podcast, and I don't know if it's because I'm like more comfortable or where it was. And after doing it, I was like, I think I went too far on this one. And I talked to my partner about it. I re-listened to it, and I was like, Yue, like, I'm really sorry, but like, would you be okay if we don't air this? And of course, Yue was like, yeah, like, don't even worry about it. Because this has happened like one time in the last like 8 years. But yeah, like, I think like there are times that I had to like reevaluate and be like, okay, do people need to know this? You know, like, is this really essential that I share it, or is it more important that I preserve parts of my relationship?
We just
That's
have to
so true.
prioritize our partners before the podcast. And I think that's the major learning is like, well, would you discuss with a partner, are you okay with this being said on air? And if they say no, then that's what you prioritize. But what irks me though is when I talk to people and they say, oh, you have a dating podcast, are you going to talk about me? And I'm like, don't give me a fucking reason to talk about. Sorry for using that.
No, you can
word.
cuss. You can say all you want.
don't give me a reason to talk about you, right? We
Right.
only talk about you if you did something terrible or if you did something really wonderful, in which case you wouldn't care if we talked about you. So it's like, it's really funny. It's like people think, oh, she has a dating podcast, she must talk about me. Like, no, we hardly talk about the people we date.
We
like,
don't care
hardly.
about you.
I mean, most people aren't interesting, realistically.
No.
But
But not interesting in that way for us to talk about.
Yeah, 100%.
But I mean, also, like, when Yue was going through her breakup, like, I remember being like, okay, you share when it's good for you. Because I think, like, ultimately, like, that's what comes first. And we've been, like, I think overall our partners have been super supportive of what we do. And for both of us, finding a partner that is supportive is essential. Like, we couldn't be with someone that didn't support this, but there's also a line of like, what's good for you, what's good for them, and what actually is important for people to really know.
Right. No, I completely agree. It's funny because I called one of my, and she went through a pretty, I would say, traumatic breakup recently. It was a high school sweetheart. It's been like, really long, and marriage and everything. And I was like, hey, I'm speaking to some people on my podcast that really dive deep into different relationships and different things like that. If it does go there, like, I was like, would you be okay with me? And she's like, are you kidding me? Bring it up. Yeah, I don't care. Like, people need to know, like, this is happening, and like people can relate to it and things like that. And I'm curious, like, when people come on your podcast, are you interviewing experts to kind of have takes on certain situations? And I'm assuming, do you guys get a lot of DMs from people that are like, hey, I'm going through this. Like, can you either speak, speak about it, or what would you, like, how do you guys feel about that advice? Like, because dating is such a spectrum of advice. Whereas with me, it's like, should I put this on my resume or not? I'm like, no, yes, no. So with dating, it's a lot about how the person is inside and how they, attract and I guess detract certain things. How do you guys handle like advice and people situations like that?
Yeah, we get a lot of DMs, and that's why we started a second show called Brunch Talk. So it's just a shorter episode where we answer specifically these questions. And we realize with advice, like, people, everything that people ask, we can guarantee you, they think they're asking a very unique question when it can all bubble up to a much more generalized question that many people can relate to. So that's why we started doing the show, because there is more general umbrella advice we can give that will hit on this specific question at hand. But it's funny, like some of the DMs can be pages and pages long because people feel like they have to put so much context into dating.
Right.
It's like, we dated for 5 years and then we moved in this and then he bought me this and then like none of that actually really matters. Like,
like, was he a piece of shit or not?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes. And that's what we try to get to with Brunch Talk, is like just get to the core of this question.
Right.
I mean, I think from day one, we've never been this podcast. We actually strongly believe this is not the way to date, is to have like arbitrary rules. And, you know, the dating books of like the 2000s, I think kind of screwed us all. Like the Why Men Love Bitches, the rules, like all those books.
The Game, you remember that one?
Yes, The Game. And I mean,
Yeah.
as someone, like for me, I would call myself a later bloomer. Like I really started dating in my mid to late 20s, and I used all the books, and it got me nowhere because I was not my authentic self. I was playing games. I was basically doing everything that's not based on connection.
Authentic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for us, when we give advice, we never say like it's hard, fast, like take what serves you, leave what doesn't. But ultimately, we always try to bring it back to like, how are you being the most authentic to yourself? If you're like, you know, people will be like, oh, should I text them back? And it's like, are you driving yourself crazy thinking about why you should just text them then? You know, like, I think like it comes down to your own well-being and what works for you. So yeah, like I think with experts too, like our show is a mix of us talking to experts, it's a mix of us talking to daters, it's a mix of us giving our own advice from our personal experiences and what we've observed from talking to thousands of modern daters. But at the end of the day, like, you know your situation best, but we hope like the learnings can inform and at least allow you to reflect back and be like, okay, what is it that I actually want?
Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that because I used to be that girl that was like, I'm never texting first. Like, I'm just like too cool. Like, I'm so
do
we
it.
all were. Cool girl syndrome. We were all that.
For sure. I mean, I'm still like, when my boyfriend doesn't text me back, I'm like, yo, you playing games? Or like, what are we doing here? What are we doing? And
Where I'm like, are you alive?
8 texts back. Yeah. I'm like, double text. Yeah. I actually, it's funny because I think for me, I mean, and I'm sure you guys would say this too. It's like communication, regardless of like whatever is the situation, is always, for me, has been the best. So with Ryan, like I will call him, like even before this podcast, I called him. I'm like, hey, I'm talking to people that like it's revolved around dating. Our relationship may or may not come up. I have no idea. I was like, how do you feel about like, where's the line of comfortability that I'm able to share about our relationship? And yeah, it was just like very simple, very easy. He's like, thanks for calling me. I appreciate it. And then he was like trying to like talk around it. Well, if you talk about that, I'm like, yo, it's either yes or no. Like, I don't care. Like, you don't have to go deep. I was like, just kind of like, can I say this or that? Right. And I want him to feel that because he's more of a private person. Whereas I'm like, I will tell everyone anything, anywhere, anytime. And it's kind of a curse because I'm just like too open, I think. And I think, you know, some people appreciate it and other people are like, how could she ever share that much? But it's just who I am, you know, and I can't help it. And even in a relationship with Ryan, I'm like, I'm just going to like tell you everything and then you can take that with what you will. But yeah, I think I love that it's so interesting because everyone that's listening to the podcast or listening to the different perspectives can totally take something out of it that another person will not.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I love that. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit because one of the things I love doing is talking about salary transparency. A lot of people don't know about the podcasting space. They hear ads, they hear, okay, maybe people can make money on it. I don't know. I would love to know what that looks like in terms of like, I think there's like specific rates or like that are across the board. So if we can share that. And then in terms of a podcast, if anyone's out there is wanting to start one, I'm obviously very early on in it, so I don't have as much advice, but you guys have been doing it for a while. How long would you say it naturally takes if you're not a celebrity or something, right, to kind of get to that point of monetizing?
Yeah,
That
I
was
mean,
a
you
lot of
bring up a
questions,
good
sorry.
point is just like the range of podcasting is astronomical, right? It's like
Yes.
you have the people at the very top getting like $10 million deals from Spotify, and then you have people that are making $0. So it's like the range is dramatic. And I think the podcasting industry in general is still relatively new, even though it's come a long way, that there isn't like the standardization that you would get like from a corporate job that it's like you make 100K by doing this. Like there's none of that that's happening. We're technically in the top 3% of podcasts, but if you look at like the top 1%, even like the range there is dramatic. So I want to just set the scene that like it can mean many different things
Yeah.
for different people. We've also, you and I've been doing this for a bit, and we've also gone to like many like podcasting events at like South by Southwest and like meetups along the way. And a lot of times people actually make more revenue from things they sell from the podcast opposed to just the podcast themselves. So we make money through ads. Like we do ads. We have multiple ad source income. A lot of it's coming from networks. Like we have a host service that we use, Red Circle, that does dynamic ads that are not us talking. And then
Okay.
we also have them do host read ads too. And then we also have another network that we're part of that also sends us ads. So we have multiple different streams. And for them, it's like more specific, like, okay, episode that went out yesterday has this ad forever. Where Red Circle, they're dynamic. Like they'll run over a month and then they'll just stop. And then they'll like keep, but they can run through your whole back catalog. So the CPMs can range too, like anywhere from like $20 to like $40, depending on where it is and what type of ad. It might even be a little less actually for those dynamic ones that are not us speaking. But
And
if it's,
CPM is cost
Yeah.
per 1,000 listens.
yes.
So if we have, let's say, 10,000 listens per episode, you can do the math on that. But don't forget, the ad agency also takes a cut of that.
Yeah.
So even if our CPM is like, let's say 25, we probably don't, we only see like
See that.
60% of that. Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
easy numbers, if 1,000 people download a podcast, it's $25
Yeah.
for the
Yes.
ads. Like it,
Yeah.
it ranges, but we're just
Yeah.
doing it easy. Yeah. I don't think people know that at all. So that's
Yeah,
super
exactly.
interesting.
It's important because it's such a technical term, and also you have to negotiate your CPM. Like CPM can really range too, and I think we started at like 15, and now we can like keep negotiating higher rates each year, but it gets really tricky because you have to know you got to negotiate that CPM first and foremost.
Yeah, and then
Okay,
Yue and I too have done direct deals where we can do it even higher, and we can also be more unique and customizable with content. Like we've done integrated content. So we've done brand deals where, we had a dating app once that was video dating long before video dating became the norm. And we did a whole episode that was centered around video dating. So we were able to
cool.
bring it in without, clearly we said it was sponsored by them, but it wasn't
But it's
like
organic.
Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, we're just going to talk about this app for 45 minutes. Like it was still an interesting conversation for people. So we've had flexibility depending on what we've done. We've done events before, we've done videos, like we've done a spectrum of that type of stuff too.
I heard in the podcast that you guys had a time where like, I think was it friends or people of the podcast that were listening were like in your bedroom?
Yes, in the very beginning, it was.
Yeah.
We did it at my apartment, my little studio apartment in San Francisco, because we're like, let's make it fun and in person. It's like a
love
live
it.
talk show, and we would have wine and
We always
cheese.
give everyone wine. That was a mistake.
Everyone
Don't
would
do
be
that if you're
fucked
starting a
up by
podcast.
the time we record, like spilling
You're
shit
like,
everywhere.
Yeah.
But also made it a really fun experience. It was just a different time. Like now
Yeah.
we do
So
everything
cool.
virtually, and I cannot imagine going back to in-person podcasting. Like just how limited we would be in terms of
Yeah.
geography and the types of guests we could get.
totally.
But the chemistry in person is definitely so much better. You just can like riff off of each other. There's pros and
Right.
cons to each.
Yeah, I think maybe the video is actually a little more streamlined, probably. Like it could,
Yeah.
depending on your show, it could be good to have that riff, that also it could be good to just get to it a little more.
Right.
And I think there was this time when we used to give everyone wine because we really did look at this as a hobby at the beginning. And there was this one guy, I just remember rambling, and I was like doing the editing at that time, and I'm just like, okay, we need to do something different because this is a waste of time. So we actually started outlining, which really helps. And it's not that we need to stick to the questions 100%, but it gives our show a flow, where when we weren't doing that, it was just kind of a free-for-all, and then you add in wine and it becomes even more of a free-for-all.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I know when I first started, it was very much like I did so much research. I wanted to have, okay, I write out their bios and then I ask this question. Then I felt like I wasn't involved and being able to really get deep into the conversation because I kept steering it or wanting. So now I definitely do key points of, I know I want to hit these things. However, like if the conversation flows somewhere else, like that's great. Right. But
there's a balance. There's definitely a balance.
And tying this back to just, I guess, money. If you do video for your podcast, which a lot of people do, the video portion is another revenue stream where you can monetize off of like YouTube, you know, let's say. And then Spotify is also starting their own monetization program for video podcasting. So it is an interesting avenue to explore. I know a lot of podcasters are hesitant to do video, but if you can get over that hump, there is another revenue stream out there for that.
Yeah.
Right.
And we've
I was gonna say we threw it on YouTube like right away because you know, but all these things you didn't know like 8 years ago, you know, you're like, we're just gonna get behind a mic. And when did you guys start videoing?
Probably in the pandemic. Yeah.
Because we had to. Yeah.
I mean, the pandemic was very pivotal for us. We actually, before the pandemic, we were like, 2020 is going to be our year. Like we actually, you know, we
like
started,
many people.
We were doing a lot. We did a live podcast in 2019. That was like a show. It was super fun. And we had plans to do that a lot more in 2020. Clearly that just went away and we went to video. But that being said, we started a group that had a monthly subscription. So that was another revenue stream. And we did a lot of, you know, video shows. Like we actually did a most dateable contest that was like a full-on pageant over video in the height of the pandemic. So there was a lot of unique opportunities. I think that's probably like a good tidbit for anyone that's interested in starting is like, of course, you can follow some of these tried and true revenue streams like ads, but what are these unique things that you can pull from?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think too, like it's really nice that everything's moving towards video and people want to see that visual. And if you make it more of a show or have little things that trickle into it, I think that makes it so much fun. I like doing dating shows for years I think would be hilarious. So that's so fun. Well, we're going to wrap up and I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming on. If you guys don't already listen to their podcast, please go listen to Dateable. And you guys have Exit Interview. But that one was a limited series, right? But still out there to listen to. Yeah.
We did this.
Tell us about it.
We did this podcast with iHeartMedia. So that was another revenue opportunity that we actually got paid for a podcast. We were able to sell our show idea to iHeart. And with that one, we actually did this episode a while back, and it was one of our most popular episodes. We called it Exit Interview. And we had a dater that just was so confused why nothing ever stuck for him. So we were like, okay, let's call 5-year past dates and hear directly from them. So with Exit Interview, the full series, we talk to 10 daters. It's a limited series, so 10 daters. And then we have 2 wrap-up episodes. And we hear from their past hookups, situationships, exes, first dates, whoever is willing to give feedback. And it was mind-blowing. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. We'll tell everyone where they can find you on socials too, and your personals as well.
Yeah. Instagram, the handle is @DateablePodcast. Same with TikTok. And then we are hardly ever on TikTok, but we do have an existence on there.
Do it. You got to do it.
You have to. You have to. Mm-hmm. And our personals are, mine is @nonplatonic, and Julie's @Julie Craft Chick.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon. We'll definitely talk to Julie soon, but hopefully too.
Thanks, Darci.
See you at another family event. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Julie and Yue were so amazing. I'm so glad I got to speak with them and talk all about podcasting and Dateable and everything that they're doing. So interesting to learn about how to monetize a podcast and all the different avenues that they're taking to do it. So if you haven't already listened to their podcast, definitely check it out. It is really amazing. And I love how open and honest they are about everything dating. So the moment you've all been waiting for, this is the last episode of Down and Dirty with Darci. I just want to thank everyone that's listened. I started this podcast with Onomy. They've supported me through the whole thing, and we've worked amazingly together. So want to give a big shout out to them. If you haven't already checked out their videos, they have a bunch of free, amazing educational content on their page, onomy.co. But they have been amazing to work with. And for me, it's just, I wanted a place to open up a space for a lot of people that didn't have the chance to be on podcasts or have an opportunity to talk about their careers, things that were different or a little bit odd, or things like being a stripper, being a food stylist, being a magician, things that you probably haven't heard of in the normal corporate world. So I wanted to give a platform to those careers, and I definitely set out to what I wanted to do. This was meant to be a series, and it is the end of the series. So thank you all so much for listening. And this podcast is going to live on. So anytime you want to go back and listen to your favorite episodes or ones you missed, or the career advice that I gave on almost every single episode, we had a career column on every episode where you could listen and learn about when people ask me questions in my DMs, I would answer them. And I talked a lot about LinkedIn, resume writing, interview prep, all of that sort of stuff. So go back and listen anytime. It will definitely live on anywhere that you get podcasts or on YouTube. Down and Dirty with Darci. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
Thanks for listening to That Onomy podcast. Onomy is a creator-led educational platform that teaches you the things you wished you learned in school so you can thrive in adulthood. Onomy lessons are completely free, and they're taught by some of your favorite creators from around the internet. Head to onomy.co to start learning about things like budgeting, investing, taxes, how to thrive in your relationships, how to find your dream job, and so much more. That's onomy.co, onomy.co. See you there.